You ever notice how the world felt safer when there was actually more danger around? That sounds backwards, but that's exactly how it felt back then. In the summers of the 60s and 70s, my entire security system was one sentence long: be home when the streetlights come on. That was it. No phone, no tracker, no hovering parents, just pure unfiltered trust wrapped in the smell of cut grass and hot asphalt. Every evening started the same way. Screen doors slammed like the drums of freedom, and somewhere a lawnmower was still grumbling under the evening light. The heat stuck to us like syrup, and our bikes, those chipped, battered steeds, were our passports. We didn't plan routes, we just pointed our front tires toward somewhere else. That was enough. I can still feel that first deep gulp of humid air when you woke to sunlight sneaking through the blinds. You'd shove a piece of toast in your mouth, grab a baseball glove, and disappear. The entire day was a blank check. When adults said go play, they actually meant go. Go until your legs burned, until the world looked different, until you ran out of daylight. You knew the neighborhood soundtrack: dogs barking, sprinklers ticking, the faint ring of a rotary phone inside a house no one was in. We lived by that rhythm, and the best part, no one was keeping score or keeping tabs. There was a kind of unwritten agreement between parents, like, if one of them yells car, they all moved together. Nobody panicked if a kid was late for dinner. They just assumed you found a creek or a ball game or some kind of trouble, and you'd wander home eventually. It's funny to think about it now, how invisible we were. Today, if a kid's gone for an hour, there's a neighborhood search party. Back then, the world just trusted us not to vanish. Sure, we scraped our knees, got sunburnt beyond belief, and occasionally earned a tetanus shot, but that was the curriculum of summer. We learned the world's edges by bumping into them. And it makes me wonder, when did that trust vanish? How did a simple summer day turn into a police report? Because the freedom that raised us, the same adventures that built our sense of self, are now considered criminal negligence. Let's start with the gateway to all mischief, the road, the endless ride to anywhere. The road called to us like a hymn, and all you needed was a bike, a few quarters, and parents with selective hearing. My friends and I used to set out without a plan. One morning I told my mom I was going to Jimmy's. She never asked which Jimmy or where he lived. If she had, the answer would have been 3 towns over. Those bikes were our freedom machines. Mine was a red Schwinn with duct tape on the seat and handle grips that smelled like rubber and adventure. We'd race each other past the gas station, past the train tracks, deep into roads that didn't even have sidewalks yet. It wasn't about where we were headed. The movement itself was the goal. Every push of the pedal was another small rebellion against gravity and authority. One July afternoon, I decided to follow my heart, or at least the direction I thought my crush lived. Somewhere between mile 6 and what felt like the edge of the earth, my chain snapped clean off. I was miles from home, sweaty, maybe 12 years old, and completely unconcerned. I looked at that busted chain, shrugged, and stuck out my thumb. The first car that stopped was a tan Ford Torino. The driver was a man in his 20s wearing a fishing hat and a grin. He leaned out the window and said, "Chain trouble?" I nodded. He popped the trunk, we tossed in my bike, and off we went, windows down. Radio blasting. I still remember the song. It was one of those AM stations where the music had more static than melody, but it felt like a soundtrack to freedom. We didn't exchange last names, and he didn't offer advice or a lecture. He just dropped me at the corner by the old diner and said, "Good luck, kid." Try explaining that story to a modern parent. They'd faint before I got to the part about the hitchhiking. But that's how it was. You trusted people, not blindly, just naturally. Small towns had invisible threads connecting everyone. The grocery cashier knew your aunt. The mailman had probably played softball with your dad. Every adult was halfway responsible for raising every kid. The idea that a stranger would hurt you seemed less likely than aliens landing behind the Piggly Wiggly. We'd hop trains of friendship all summer long. Sometimes we biked to the lake and swam fully dressed. Sometimes we hitched a ride home in the back of someone's pickup, wind whipping through our hair, clutching an old cooler like it was gold. We weren't rebels, we were just explorers. Gas station clerks gave us free candy if we promised not to tell. Strangers gave us directions we pretended to understand. The world felt wide open, and here's the important part, kind. If something went wrong, you fixed it yourself. Flat tire? We patched it with chewing gum until we reached a service station. Thirsty? Knock on a stranger's door. Someone would hand you a glass of warm tap water from a yellow Tupperware cup. No one thought twice. It wasn't charity. It was just life. Now, I'm not saying it was smart. Half of what we did was dumb as a box of hammers. We rode under thunderstorms, no helmets. Sometimes racing the lightning home, we crossed busy intersections like daredevils, but through it all, we learned self-reliance. You paid for every decision with a scraped shin or a lesson in humility. There were no participation trophies, just a sense of pride in making it back before the streetlights flickered on. And when you finally rolled up the driveway, sunburnt and delirious with thirst, your mom didn't scold you for disappearing. She just looked up from the sink and said, "Supper's almost ready." That was it. No interrogation, no GPS ping, no lecture on stranger danger. The unspoken rule was, as long as you made it home in one piece, you must have done something right. Looking back, those miles weren't just geography, they were childhood measured in distance. We were apprentices of the open road, learning how to handle freedom before we had driver's licenses. Each ride expanded our mental map of the world and our confidence in it. These days I watch kids riding bikes in helmets that make them look like astronauts, parents walking behind, cell phones tracking every turn. And I get it, times changed, dangers became louder, the news made fear a national pastime. But part of me misses that invisible pact between grown-ups and kids. I'll trust you until you give me a reason not to. Because we didn't just learn balance on those bikes, we learned faith. Faith that most people meant well. Faith that a broken chain didn't mean a ruined day. And faith that the world, for all its dark corners, was still a place worth pedaling through. We didn't even need to leave our street to find adventure. Sometimes the greatest kingdoms were being built right under our noses. Every neighborhood had one, the half-built house that became the center of our universe. You could smell it before you even saw it. Wet sawdust, tar paper, and the faint sweetness of new lumber baking in the sun. To adults, it was private property. To us, it was Narnia with splinters. We'd stash our bikes in the weeds and crawl through the gaps in the fence like commandos, certain we were invisible even though our bright t-shirts practically glowed. The air inside those frames was still and heavy, filled with the echo of hammers from workers long gone for the day. It felt sacred, like we were trespassing in a place halfway between imagination and danger. No one ever said it out loud, but we all understood we weren't supposed to be there, which made it perfect. The thrill wasn't just climbing unfinished stairs or hanging from wooden beams. It was knowing we were exactly one shout away from getting caught. My buddy Ronnie once dared me to walk the ridge beam of an unfinished roof. It was only a few feet off the ground on one side, but to my 12-year-old brain, it might as well have been Niagara Falls. I took 3 shaky steps, lost my footing, and dropped straight into a pile of insulation. It scratched like fiberglass lightning and clung to me for days. We laughed so hard we couldn't breathe. Ronnie said I looked like a radioactive snowman. When a nail went through someone's sneaker, we didn't file an incident report. We limped home. Moms handled first aid like field medics. A quick rinse under the hose, a dab of iodine that burned like justice, and a pat on the shoulder. "You'll live," she'd say, and we did. Sometimes we found treasures, half-empty paint cans, bent nails that we hammered straight, scraps of plywood we used to build our own forts. One time, we discovered a stack of blueprints left behind by the foreman, and we spread them out on the floor pretending we were city planners. "This'll be the kitchen," somebody said, pointing to a rectangle, "and this is our secret base." For that afternoon, we believed it. Those blue lines weren't floor plans, they were maps to freedom. Just beyond the houses over the hill was the quarry. Calling it a swimming spot would be generous. It was really a flooded gravel pit with rocks sharp enough to slice your foot open before you even hit the water. But when the sun turned the surface green and shimmery, it looked irresistible. We'd strip down to cut-offs and cannonball in, terrified and thrilled at the same time. The older kids told stories that the bottom was endless, that a backhoe had sunk and never been found, that you'd get sucked down by some mysterious current. We pretended not to believe them, but we still swam with one eye on the depths. Half courage, half common sense. Those places taught us something school never did, calculated risk. You learned which beams could hold your weight, which puddles were deeper than they looked. You looked out for each other, too. If someone slipped, a dozen grimy hands reached down to pull them back up. We didn't need warning labels. We had scars. I still remember the feeling of walking home at dusk, clothes caked in dust, shoes full of gravel. The smell of the lumber would cling to your skin, and you felt older somehow, like you'd survived a small war. Nobody asked what we were doing. They just knew boys covered in mud had been somewhere good. Now, construction sites are locked tighter than Fort Knox. Orange fencing, no trespassing signs, cameras blinking like little robotic tattletales. Liability, insurance, safety codes. They built walls around the very idea of curiosity. Kids look at a half-built house today and see danger tape, not adventure. I can't blame anyone. Times changed for reasons that made sense, but I wonder what we lost when risk avoidance became the rule of childhood. We learned fear the right way through scraped shins and dumb mistakes. We learned responsibility by breaking the line and coming back in one piece. Each misstep was a mini engineering lesson, each bruise a receipt for courage earned. There was a silent kind of mentorship in those reckless games. The older kids showed you which planks to trust, which boards to avoid. It wasn't supervision, it was apprenticeship in chaos. That's how community worked before everything came with a handbook. And humor, God, there was always humor, like the time our friend Eddie fell into a mound of wet concrete up to his knees. Panic set in until Ronnie shouted, "Don't move, you'll be part of the foundation." We were doubled over while Eddie tried to pry himself free, leaving his sneakers permanently entombed. That slab probably still hides his Converse like some archaeological relic of 1973. We weren't bad kids, maybe naive, sure, but never malicious. We didn't break windows or steal tools. We just borrowed a bit of imagination from the future homeowners. Those skeleton houses were our test runs at adulthood, a place to build confidence before anyone expected us to have any. Every nail bent under our hammers became a tiny victory. These days, kids' adventures are fenced in pre-approved playgrounds with rubber floors and shade sails, perfectly safe, perfectly forgettable. I look at those bright plastic slides and think how dull they'd seemed to a gang of us back then. We wanted splinters, mystery, the thrill of building something no one told us to build. If freedom had an odor, it would have been that mix of tar and pine in the evening sun. The sound was the creak of wooden joists and the clatter of a dropped hammer echoing across a half-finished subdivision. We were rich in risk and poor in common sense, and that combination made for the best education we could have had. Sometimes I drive past new developments, roofs gleaming, fences uniform, yards manicured to perfection. They're complete, flawless, but lifeless. And I can almost hear the ghosts of our laughter bouncing off those empty beams from somewhere 40 summers back. Because while the grown-ups were busy building homes, we were busy building ourselves. One splinter, one scraped palm, one forbidden climb at a time. And when we couldn't find danger outside, well, that's when the real experiments began right in our own backyards. Sometimes the danger wasn't 3 streets over. It was sitting right there in the shed next to the lawnmower gas. When we couldn't find a half-built house to conquer, we made our own chaos. Every kid on the block thought he was some kind of junior scientist, armed with nothing more than a few matches, a magnifying glass, and a wild disregard for personal safety. My first real experiment began with my friend Danny and a can of lighter fluid. We'd seen something on TV about volcanoes and decided to recreate one using a coffee can, some dirt, and whatever we could pour into it that would ignite. We weren't out to hurt anybody, we just wanted to see something happen. That's the essence of boyhood curiosity, not knowledge, just combustion with ambition. We poured the fuel, struck a match, and backed away a whole 3 feet, which we believed was the safety zone. The coffee can roared to life, spitting a column of flame that turned the fence black and singed Danny's eyebrows into history. I swear. He spent the rest of the summer looking permanently surprised. We should have been scared out of our minds, but instead we howled with laughter. Our only worry was whether our parents could smell the smoke before it cleared. That was the rhythm of backyard science: create chaos, admire the results, hide the evidence. The adults probably knew. The charred grass circles and missing bottle caps were clues even Sherlock Holmes couldn't miss, but they let it slide. Their philosophy seemed to be, if you didn't blow yourself up, you learned your lesson. Fireworks season was our peak laboratory phase. You could buy a bag of them at every roadside stand, no age check, no warnings except light, fuse, and get away. Get away could mean anything from 3 feet to the next zip code, depending on how ambitious you felt. We'd duct tape 2 bottle rockets together, call it a double-thrust prototype, and launch it from Coke bottles buried halfway in the dirt. The good ones reached the clouds. The bad ones veered sideways into someone's laundry line. Either outcome was considered success. I once stuck sparklers into an old broken radio antenna to make a space probe. It flew about 3 feet before it exploded in a shower of colored sparks across the driveway. My little sister screamed, I cheered, and Mom came out with that half-amused, half-terrified look that said, "I don't even want to know." She just pointed the garden hose at us and said, "Cool it down before you light the next one." That was parental oversight in those days, practical, not paranoid. There was a special joy in improvisation. We'd empty firecrackers, mix the powder in tinfoil, and call it homemade rocket fuel. The results were underwhelming but exhilarating. One time, I even tried to make a smoke bomb using ping-pong balls because a comic book said it worked. Spoiler, it works too well. The white plume that billowed across our street looked like a Cold War weapons test. A neighbor shouted, "Is someone fogging for mosquitoes?" We just nodded and scattered. I think of it now and I can hear the laughter, those hoarse, uncontrollable fits that made your stomach hurt. Half the fun was the secrecy. The way you whispered plans like you were building a spy gadget instead of a failure waiting to happen. We built slingshots from inner tubes, balance beams from fence posts, and once a zip line that ended in the trash cans. We weren't reckless for the sake of danger. We were creators in training, learning physics by bruises. And sure, there were consequences. My mom kept a steady stock of bandages, aloe cream, and hydrogen peroxide, the holy trinity of childhood survival. She'd shake her head, muttering something about brains left on the playground, but deep down, I think she admired that we tried things. She and Dad both believed in the educational value of failure, though they probably didn't expect it to involve pyrotechnics. What's funny is those experiments taught more genuine science than a semester at school. You learned combustion, airflow, structural integrity, all with the stakes of your own eyebrows. When something blew up, you adjusted. When it worked, you took notes in the dirt with a stick and declared yourself a genius. Curiosity wasn't graded, it just existed. Now every spark is outlawed, every flame controlled, backyard fireworks are banned in half the country. Even magnifying glass burn tests would have neighbors calling the fire marshal. I can't argue with the safety logic. We were one gust of wind away from setting the block ablaze, but I miss the trust that allowed us to learn from small mistakes before they could become big ones. Today's version of experiment happens behind screens, kids testing apps instead of explosions. I suppose that's progress. But there's something irreplaceable about the way smoke smelled on your hands or how your heart raced when a fuse hissed just a little too long. That's how we learned courage, waiting out the spark, leaning closer than we should, believing maybe, just maybe. This time we built something magnificent. When night finally fell, we'd sit in the yard, watching the scorch marks fade in the dim light and feeling proud, like junior astronauts who'd just survived re-entry. The stars overhead looked almost reachable because for a few seconds that day, we'd touched something close. Those backyard experiments weren't just explosions, they were declarations of possibility. Proof that with a handful of junk and a good imagination, the universe could be yours for the afternoon. And maybe that's what's missing now, not the firecrackers or the danger, but the confidence that we could figure it out ourselves. Sometimes I look at my grandkids tapping on tablets, their world perfectly lit and perfectly safe, and I want to hand them a coffee can and a sparkler and say, here, try not to burn down the yard. Because I think every generation deserves one good explosion they can remember fondly. And just when we grew tired of the smoke, when the thrill faded and the night got quiet, another kind of adventure called. One that didn't need fire or flame, just an open day, a full sun, and no one asking where we were going. Sometimes the greatest experiment of all was simply disappearing until supper. Morning in the 70s had a scent all its own: cereal dust, screen door hinges, and the distant hum of lawnmowers starting their daily symphony. I'd swallow the last spoonful of cornflakes, drop the bowl in the sink, and say the daily prayer of youth, I'm going out. That was it. No follow-up questions, no itinerary. The screen door slammed behind me like the starter pistol of freedom. My mother might not see me again until the 6 o'clock news. Somehow that never worried her. The world opened at the end of the driveway. I'd hop on my bike with no direction beyond the breeze. Sometimes we followed the smell of grilling hot dogs drifting from the park. Other times, we headed toward the faint hiss of the river on the far side of the tracks. There was no schedule, no supervision, just a sun that rose for us and a stomach that decided when to go home. Hours bent like taffy. You could cram a lifetime of discovery between breakfast and dusk. There were rituals to our vanishing act. First stop, the convenience store, where 50 cents bought enough candy to fuel a marathon. Then the woods, thick with mosquitoes and mystery. We built forts out of fallen branches, tested slingshots on aluminum cans, and waded through creeks that smelled like minerals and adventure, bare feet on slick rocks. Frogs scattering ahead, it felt like owning the wilderness. The laughter echoed through the trees long after we moved on, as if the forest wanted in on the fun. Lunch never came from a kitchen. It came from whatever we could barter. Someone always had a bologna sandwich smashed flat in a wax bag. Divide it 4 ways, chase it with warm root beer, and it tasted like victory. We learned generosity by necessity. Friendship was a shared sandwich under the shade of a stolen road sign. By late afternoon, the horizon looked like melted brass. The air shimmered, shirts clung, and you started pondering the long ride home that you'd been ignoring all day. Sometimes we took the long way just because we could. Sometimes we got lost and we didn't panic. We argued which way felt right, trusted the sun like a compass, and eventually stumbled onto familiar pavement. Getting lost was just another word for learning. The things we found could fill a museum. Rusted license plates, glass marbles, the holy grail of discarded magazines hidden under a bridge. Once, we discovered an abandoned refrigerator in a field and decided it was a time capsule. We stuffed it with notes and bottle caps, convinced future archaeologists would thank us. Childhood was basically graduate school in pointless but joyful invention. There was one day I remember clearer than most. We'd wandered farther than usual, following a stream that disappeared into tall weeds. The ground turned into mud that sucked at our sneakers, but we kept going, curious about where the water went. Hours passed, the sky tilted orange. When we finally came out on the edge of a cornfield miles from home, we realized we'd outwalked the familiar world. No one had a watch, no one cared. We just stared at the glow behind the silo and felt that strange mix of pride and disbelief we made it here. By the time I trudged home, it was nearly dark. My mom looked up from the stove and said, "You're late." That was her entire investigative report. My arms were scratched, my pockets full of pebbles, the mud line halfway up my shins. She handed me a towel and told me to wash before dinner. If I'd vanished for 12 hours today, there'd be a statewide alert. Back then, it was just Tuesday. That trust was its own kind of safety net. The adults believed in the competence of children. We learned time management not from phone reminders, but from watching the length of shadows. We learned accountability because no one was coming to rescue us if we were late. Freedom carried responsibility like a secret twin, and that's what made it precious. Even our check-ins were analog. If Mrs. Miller saw us riding past her house at 3, word would reach my parents by dinner time through the mysterious grapevine of adult communication. Neighborhoods had eyes that weren't intrusive. They were protective in the quiet communal way. You could vanish all day and still exist safely inside an invisible web of goodwill. But there were close calls. Once we lost track of a younger kid, little Stevie. He had decided to follow a trail deeper into the woods while we were busy trying to build a dam. Panic set in, not parental panic, but the gut realization that we were supposed to look out for each other. We split up, shouting his name until our throats hurt. Found him sitting on a log, eating blackberries, purple-mouthed and grinning. We didn't tell the adults. We just gave him the rest of our candy and swore to stick tighter next time. Lessons learned the hard and human way. The ride home as the sun dipped low was the sweetest part. Every driveway we passed smelled like charcoal. Sprinklers hissed against heat-softened lawns. Your legs burned, your back ached, and the whole day clung to you. Grass, dirt, laughter. That first sip of water from the garden hose tasted like victory and metal. You'd lean your bike against the porch, skin tingling from the afterglow, and know you'd squeezed every ounce of daylight possible. Today's kids have GPS check-ins, apps that timestamp every movement, parents exchanging texts between playdates. I understand it. The world's louder now. Fear has better marketing, but I wish they could taste that dizzy weightlessness of knowing no one expected an update. That calm confidence that as long as the sun hadn't set, you were exactly where you were supposed to be out there. Because those vanished hours weren't wasted time. They were the making of us. Every missed meal, every scraped shin, every half-remembered shortcut etched a little more independence into our bones. We didn't know it then. But disappearing for a day was our rehearsal for adulthood. The wild world tested us kindly, and we came home a little braver each night. And even when we were finally back with our families, sitting in parked cars while Mom ran an errand, the lessons of disappearance stuck with us. Trust, patience, the art of being alone without being afraid. And that's where the story heads next to those parked cars. Those unguarded minutes that taught us how to wait in a world that never seemed to. You ever sit in a parked car in July with the windows cracked and the vinyl seats hot enough to brand cattle? If you did, you probably grew up when I did. That was the waiting room of childhood, the back seat of a Dodge with a half-melted root beer pop, the engine ticking in the heat, and orders from Mom, "Stay here, I'll be right back." Right back could mean 5 minutes or the length of a small grocery trip through every aisle twice. And by some miracle, we were fine. Sweaty, restless, maybe a little dramatic about it, but fine. I remember tracing shapes on the foggy window with a finger coated in potato chip grease, pretending I was sending secret messages to passing cars. Sometimes I'd slide into the driver's seat just to feel that grown-up thrill of gripping the wheel. The key was rarely left in, but the steering made a satisfying clunk, and that was enough imagination fuel to cruise across America. If you had siblings, that car became both amusement park and battleground. My sister and I invented games that had real consequences. Step on the crack became don't touch the seatbelt buckle or you'll burn alive. We used old receipts as playing cards, the glove compartment flashlight as a lightsaber, and when desperation peaked, the radio knobs as science experiments. You'd twist until static and gospel stations collided into something halfway between a sermon and a spaceship landing. Once, my mom left us out front of the pharmacy while she went to pick up prescriptions. She cracked both front windows and said, "Don't touch anything." Naturally, I touched everything. Wiper switch, check. Turn signal, check. Seat adjustment lever, that was the jackpot. The seat slid forward with such force it jammed under the steering wheel. When she returned, she found me pinned like a sandwich. I expected doom. Instead, she sighed, laughed one of those helpless mom laughs, and said, "You'll live to drive someday if the car survives you." Then she just fixed it and drove off, windows down, like nothing happened. We lived through an age when boredom wasn't a crisis. Waiting was just part of life, something to fill with imagination or petty sibling arguments. Nowadays, leaving a kid in a car for 2 minutes, even with the engine running and the air conditioning on, brings flashing lights and a CPS report. And I understand the concern. We've heard too many horror stories on the news, but back then, cars were practically auxiliary playrooms. A 10-minute errand was an open canvas. Sometimes Mom would hit the post office and we'd get the show of the century, the people coming and going. We cast them like movie characters. That guy's a spy. That lady robs banks, but only on weekends. Once we saw our teacher in blue jeans instead of work clothes and almost fainted. The world looked strange through those smudged windows, ordinary adults recast as mysteries. If you think about it, the car wasn't confinement, it was observation deck training. And when parents ran longer errands, say grocery shopping, it shifted from boredom to serious responsibility. "Watch your brother," Mom would say. Boom! You were suddenly an authority figure at age 9. That back seat became your kingdom, and your siblings' complaints were rebellion. I remember holding court from the middle bench of a station wagon, declaring, "You can't eat all the cookies or I'll tell." Leadership training, old school style. When the heat got unbearable, every kid developed the same ingenuity, the towel on the seat method. You'd grab whatever scrap of cloth you could, paper, grocery bag, sweatshirt, and create barriers against molten vinyl. Then there was the hand-waving contest with strangers. We'd grin at another kid trapped in his mom's car 2 spaces over, sharing that silent look of "you too, huh?" Without saying a word, we were part of a secret club called the Temporarily Abandoned But Totally Safe. The older I got, the longer those waits stretched. Sometimes Dad left me in the car while he went inside the hardware store. He'd leave the window half down and the keys dangling because back then no one worried about theft in broad daylight. I'd sit for what felt like hours, reading comic books or watching ants colonize the curb. The air smelled of oil, metal, and freshly cut lumber. When he came back, we didn't call that neglect, we called it Tuesday. At its core, the car wait was a trust exercise. Parents believed we had enough sense not to eat weird things or drive away. That small vote of confidence stuck with me more than any rule book. You learn patience when there's nothing to distract you but your own thoughts. You learn observation when the only entertainment is the rhythm of people coming and going. And in those tiny moments, the world outside turned slower, like it kept pace with your heartbeat instead of a clock. Funny thing, those same cars that cooked us into puddles taught us the boundaries of safety better than any lecture. You recognized real danger by feel, not by adult warnings. If it was too hot, you opened the door. If you felt anxious, you looked for your parents' face through the glass. Simple, clear instincts built through lived risk. Years later, I tried to explain this freedom to my daughter. She couldn't believe it. "You mean Grandma left you in the car?" she gasped, as if I'd just confessed to surviving the wilderness with a fork. I smiled and said, "And somehow I managed to reach adulthood without melting." It became one of those family legends that make kids laugh and parents wince at the same time. But beneath the humor sits a truth. We equated safety with common sense, not constant supervision. Those quiet car waits built a certain resilience. We learned how to entertain ourselves with radio fuzz, the rattle of passing trucks, our own imagination. We learned that silence wasn't something to be feared. And when the door finally opened and Mom slid back behind the wheel, the rush of cool air and the smell of her perfume felt like winning the lottery. She never apologized for the wait. She just asked, "You good?" and started the engine, and we always were. I know the world's changed. There's more traffic, thinner patience, harsher headlines. Parents today live under scrutiny we never imagined. But part of me wishes kids could experience just one of those timeless, slightly uncomfortable sits in a sun-baked car. That small, faith-filled pause where the world simply trusted you to exist for a moment on your own. Because in those still, sticky afternoons, wedged between the grocery bags and the hum of an idling engine, we learned something vital: how to be alone without being lonely, how to trust that someone always came back. And as far as summer lessons go, that's one worth remembering. If I'm honest, I'm grateful my grandkids get to grow up in a safer world. Helmets, seatbelts, sunscreen, all good things. We earned some of those rules the hard way with broken bones and bad ideas, but every time I see a no trespassing sign where we once built forts, or a parent tailing a child down the sidewalk like Secret Service, I feel a kind of quiet ache. We saved them from the bruises, sure, but we also saved them from the wonder that came with them. The thing is, risk was never the enemy, it was the teacher. Freedom didn't just mean the chance to run wild, it meant learning consequences firsthand and realizing they weren't the end of the world. You got hurt, you healed, you adjusted. Every scar was an instruction manual written on your own skin. Now we raise kids who never fall far enough to learn how to get up. Their worlds are polished, padded, supervised, and GPS approved. They're safe but smaller. I get why it happened. Fear sells better than trust. But somewhere along the way, we traded courage for control. And childhood became something to manage instead of something to live through. I miss the dirt under my fingernails, the blistered palms from climbing a rope that wasn't OSHA certified. I miss believing the adults would be there if things truly went wrong, but trusting they wouldn't need to be. We were free not because the world was gentle, but because we were allowed to face it. And the grown-ups back then, they weren't careless. They just believed kids could survive the same world they did. That belief built us tougher, friendlier, more curious. We tested boundaries without hating authority, learned fear without letting it guide us. Sometimes, late at night, I think of the smell of that hot asphalt, the fading echo of screen doors, and the promise tucked inside a single sentence, be home when the streetlights come on. That one rule built a lifetime of resilience. If this stirred up an old summer of your own, pull up a chair on this porch of mine, tap subscribe, and bring someone who remembers. Same time next week, I'll put a record on. You bring the memories.